Chapter 4, Pablo Sosa. We clocked in the next day and sold damn near $3,000 worth in about 2 hours. I'd seen the detectives drive by in the dark blue Impala, and one of them looked directly at me, so I walked around the corner and circled the block on foot. I got back down the block, and as soon as I saw the coast was clear, I started serving. Not even 2 minutes passed before I felt a hard-ass push from the back. I hit the ground, looked over, saw some blue New Balances, looked up, and saw it was the same stout, white-faced detective who looked right in my face. They put the handcuffs on me, sat me on the ground, went into my stash, and found the last 7 slabs, that's 10 slabs or glassines, $10 a piece, in a $100 bundle. I was almost done. I looked across the street and they were coming out of the building with Jay in handcuffs. They crossed the street and sat him down right next to me. When we got to the precinct, I didn't know what to expect, and I was scared. The detectives pulled me out of my cell, brought me in the back, showed me pictures of people I knew, and asked me questions I knew all the answers to. They told me they wanted to help me, but they needed my help. I'd never been in a situation like this, and I just wanted to go home. As I looked at the pictures, I saw the faces of people who did help me. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have had anything I'd possessed. For me to repay them by putting them in the situation I was in, just so I could get out, felt wrong. Dead wrong. Nobody made me do what I was doing out on that corner. I looked at the pictures and said, I don't know them. Once he was convinced that I was of no use to him, the detective kneeled close to my ear and whispered aggressively, well, I hope you like prison, because that's where you're going. Roughly lifted me up and put me back in the cell. They let Jay go because I said I didn't know him. Gave him a ticket and charged him with trespassing. They let me go the next day because it was my first offense. ROR is what they called it. Released on your own recognizance. I was thrilled. Glad it was all over. That was easy. Me and Jay went right back to the block. It was nothing else we could do. We had no money. A couple months later, I was chilling on 163rd and Kelly talking to my homegirl, Kia, who lived on the block I hustled on. I was sitting on SB's mountain bike, and out of nowhere, detectives sped up to the corner, hopped out of their car, and yelled, "Freeze!" Instinctively, I melted. I ran through a schoolyard, and the cops cut me off by driving against traffic up a one-way street. Even though I hadn't been hustling all that day, I just threw the bike down and ran. I got to this building and the door was locked. This door was never locked. I pressed the bell, but as soon as I buzzed, the cop put the gun on my head, right behind my ear, and screamed for me to get down on my knees. I complied. He cuffed me, walked me to his cruiser, and put me in the back seat. When he and his partner got in the passenger and driver's seat and closed the door, I said to them, y'all better not do nothing to me because my aunt knows exactly how I looked when I left the house this morning. The cop in the passenger seat turned right around and punched me dead in the middle of my face. The 41st Precinct had grown a reputation for being corrupt. Back in the 60s and 70s, they were known as Fort Apache, and the stories of their tactics spread throughout the Bronx. I was screwed. This time, there was no coming home. I'd missed my court date from the first time I was arrested and got remanded. A hold in the system that makes you ineligible to have a bail or bond. The same dudes the cops tried to get me to turn on came to bail me out, but it wasn't happening. My co-defendant was somebody I'd never met a day in my life named Pablo Sosa. Flashback. I'm laughing my head off at this moment because at the time, I just didn't put together how bad of a fake name that was. I'd never heard of Pablo Escobar and hadn't seen the movie Scarface yet. End of flashback. The police report said Beck Street. I'd never hustled on, knew anybody, or even been on Beck Street. And anyway, they arrested me on 163rd Street. Turns out the police were chasing some skinny black kid on a bike. I was sitting on a bike and that kid got away. They put me in his place. They shipped me from the Bronx House holding facility to Rikers Island. I see why they say nobody's smiling on Rikers Island. I was there about 7 months before I got sentenced and had only 2 physical altercations from the date I got arrested. The first was at the Bronx House, where this kid tried to walk my sneakers out of my cell while I was sleeping. But I caught him. I acted like I was still sleeping, and as he walked out of my cell, I grabbed him from the back and banged his head on the toilet. The second incident was on Rikers. I was sent to C-73 2 Lower Main. This incident was a shock to me because me and the dude had grown a relationship and were cool. It was over something small, but on the island, if you let the smallest thing slide, you became food. The kid threw a plastic chair at me. I caught it mid-air before it could hit me, but still. When I approached him to see what his problem was, he snuffed me. That's an off-guard punch to the face. At that exact moment, the COs came in to do the pedigree. That's the count on Rikers to make sure every inmate is accounted for. We kept it low, but I was heated. This dude from University Avenue in the Bronx named Barkim was like, "Fuck that. Wait till after the count and fuck him up." That was my plan. That, or he was going to have to fuck me up. Either way, a confrontation was imminent. We all crammed into the day room and walked out one by one as the CO, correctional officer, counted us. I saw the kid and his man in the corner laughing when it was my turn to walk out. I went, sat on my bed, and waiting for the last man to leave that day room. When Barkim came out, he sat on my bed. I never let anybody sit on my bed or lean on my locker, but my focus was elsewhere. Plus, Barkim was pledging allegiance. The last man walked out. The CO left, and I headed straight toward the dude. Barkim grabbed me and said, "Chill, take it in the bathroom." I was about 120 pounds. The kid was just a little bit bigger, but in that moment, I was totally illogical. We went in the bathroom, and about 10 seconds later, the fight was over. One punch. He was laid out. I tried to go buffet on him, but his man wasn't having it and grabbed me in a chokehold from the back, but quickly released me, raised his hands as if he was being arrested and said, "You got it. That's my man. I was just breaking it up." The crowd drew the CO's attention. He picked his man up, and we all walked out the bathroom like nothing had happened. I saw Big Chuck in the mess hall sitting with about 30 Bloods gang members. The fight had just happened. He was housed in a totally different unit, but he already knew about the fight. Don't ask me how. He stood up, called my name and said, "Niggas is acting up." His whole table looked and waited for my response. My table did the same, including the dude I'd fought with. Chuck was about 5'8" and 200 pounds of solid muscle. His fingernails may have even had muscle. He was the first person I'd ever seen do handstand push-ups in the center of the dorm like he was leaning on a wall. He breakdanced downtown with my cousin, and that's how I'd met him. We shared a house when I first got to the island. Shortly after reacquainting with him, I was transferred to a new house. I looked at my house, looked at Chuck, and said, "Nah, everything's cool." Everybody reassuredly went back to eating. Other than that, I was a rapper, and that's what I was known for. One day, I got a visit. I didn't know what was up because so far, no one had come to visit me, and that's how I wanted it. No expectations. I'd gotten letters and a couple of packages from Raynette, but this visit was weird. The visit process wasn't going as I'd heard visits went. They walked me to this little cubicle and left me there for about 5 to 10 minutes. Next thing I saw was one of the most beautiful faces I'd ever seen. It was my little brother Keith's mother, Pam. Pam had become a parole officer, so she got the hookup and came to see me. Since we'd lived together in Jersey when I was younger, we'd never lost touch. Me and SB would spend weekends at her apartment in Manhattan playing video games with Keith, listening to music, watching movies and stuff. When I saw her, I just hopped up, "Ma!" with my arms outstretched trying to hug her. She pushed me and said, "Boy, calm down. You trying to blow it up? Sit down." I was just so excited to see her face. We sat down at a table, facing each other, and she just looked at me with her lips in a pout, shaking her head from left to right in disappointment. She had no idea I was selling drugs. I just put my head down. She said, "Pick your head up. You're here now, and this is what it is. Are you okay?" I slow nodded, yes. She asked me, "What happened?" I told her the truth. We talked for about an hour and a half. She told me she left some money and picked up all my jewelry from property. She also told me I could call her every weekend collect, and I did, all the way up until I went home. She had to leave, and just that quick, our visit was done. I gave Pam a kiss and a hug. She left, and I went back upstairs to jail. Jay and SB came to visit me a few weeks later. We were cracking jokes, catching up, and they left me some money, clothes, and underwear. It was a short visit. My imprisonment was killing my vibe. I just wasn't used to it yet. I wanted to leave with Jay and SB, but I couldn't. I gave them both pounds, a handshake, and went back upstairs after my strip search. I woke up one morning and was called for court. Everyone who had court had to step out into the hallway. I started seeing people I knew from the street. We weren't allowed to speak and had to walk single file against the wall to this room where we waited to be handcuffed and put on the bus. These dudes that the COs referred to as predicate slashers were loaded onto the bus first. They had to wear these things on their hands that looked like boxing gloves. Their wrists and feet were shackled, and they were led onto the bus alone, one at a time. They were placed in a separate compartment on the front of the bus, surrounded by a cage, while the rest of us sat side by side, one wrist cuffed to another inmate. I was handcuffed to a white kid, and apparently the two guys behind me were Latin kings. One of the predicate dudes was a blood, and he was nuts. The way he talked to those Latin kings sounded like he had a genuine hate for them. But I could tell they'd never met. The Latin kings returned the verbal assault and mixed it in with gang signs from their free hands. Them not knowing each other made no difference. If either of them had the chance, they'd make sure they made the other feel the worst kind of pain. The blood's rage was inflamed by the king's signs. It's like the blood was speaking another language, like he was possessed. It was almost demonic. He couldn't throw any signs with those boxing glove looking restraints, and he was chained top to bottom. The CO warned them that he would kick them off the bus if they didn't quiet down. Everybody hated the last bus because it's more wait time and more time sitting handcuffed. I couldn't believe what I just witnessed. We got to the Bronx Supreme Court building from Queens, were placed in the cells with about 20 people, got uncuffed, and waited to see the judge. While we were waiting, the blood that was on the bus was placed in a separate cell by himself, still cuffed. After a few minutes, the blood just yelled out, "Peace, Almighty!" And at least 30 voices from unseen faces yelled back, "Peace, blood!" Then they went on to do this whole call and response chant. I love music, but this was deeper, darker, and deadlier. I felt it in my bones, and what they were saying gave me chills. It went on for a few minutes and ended with them repeating, saying, "Brat, brat, brat." Then it was quiet. The COs didn't even bother telling them to be quiet, so I'm guessing this must have happened before. Then it started. The language. They had their own form of communicating, yelling back and forth indecipherable code known only to the members of the Bloods. After about an hour of waiting, one by one, names were being called. They finally got to my name, and I was escorted to another section of the building to different cells for another dose of waiting. This cell was in an area where when your name was called, you got to speak to your lawyer before going to see the judge. I had a public pretender, aka a public defender, named Mr. Raymond. A public defender is a lawyer appointed to you by the very same court that's trying to prosecute, convict, and send you to jail. I learned about all that years later, but the feeling I got when I first met the man was I just did not trust him. I was new to the system, and although I lacked the knowledge on how it all worked, I felt he wasn't on my side. Everything he said and his demeanor showed me he did not have my best interests at heart. He wanted this over and done as quickly as possible. He didn't even ask me what happened or if I was innocent. I couldn't believe he was trying to get me to willingly go to jail instead of getting me to fight. I got offered something called a plea deal. A plea deal is offered by the court to avoid a costly trial, but you've got to be willing to go to prison. To me, it was dirty and very underhanded. I got arrested for the first time and I had no drugs on me. They found it close to where I was standing and I did do it, so I guess I could deal with that. The second time I was arrested, I was completely innocent. It was time to face the judge. They brought me in through this little door and led me into this huge courtroom. The Supreme Court. Funny. This didn't seem like a supreme case. Even the courts had their own language, just like the Bloods. It was all about me, and I didn't understand a word they were saying. 1.5 to 4.5 years for both charges. I was already in jail for 7 months, and that time counted in the sentence of the 1.5, so I'd be out in less than a year unless I got hit at the parole board for negative behavior during my incarceration. The judge asked me things like, am I pleading guilty of my own free will? And yada yada. A bunch of shit I don't remember. I had to say out loud I was guilty for the court records, even for the crime I did not commit. And there it was. I was sentenced and I knew exactly how much time I was facing. It was a long bus ride back to Rikers. I finally arrived and was placed in the Why Me pen because the standard cells were full. Then, the pens where we waited to be strip searched. Someone called my name. "Yo, Jojo!" I looked across the way, and in a different cell, I saw my homeboy, Kareem. Kareem is the only young dude I knew personally that owned a Bentley. I knew him from Morehouse Projects. I said, "Oh shit, what the fuck is you doing in here?" He threw his hands up in an "I don't know" gesture and said, "I don't know. What you doing in here?" Oh man. Yo, we both just busted out laughing. He hadn't been there long, and I could tell he was fresh off the street. His red hat and red barrettes at the end of long boxed braids, red Coogee sweater, and red sneakers told me what it was. I looked around his cell, and all the dudes were dressed similar. 1997 was a strange year. I'd never heard of the Bloods, but here it was no avoiding them. We talked over all the loud chatter until it was time for me to go. I told him I'd see him on the block, and I was off. I hated getting strip searched and wondered to myself, what kind of man takes a job where one of the duties is looking up another man's ass, then got the nerve to tell that man to turn around, lift his nuts, and cough? Shaking my head. The mystery was over. So was my stay at Rikers Island. I had to admit, it at least felt good knowing how much time I was facing on that long bus ride heading to the next correctional facility in Ulster County. I got there, and compared to Rikers Island, it was very clean. The food was better, and there was a little bit more space in the bedding areas. I wouldn't be there long, though. This was just one of the many stops I'd make before reaching the final facility. My next stop was Elmira State Prison. That tall-ass wall let me know, you're not in jail. This is prison. Thankfully, I didn't have to stay. Right after court on Rikers, I got a call from my PD, Mr. Raymond, and he offered me a program called Shock, where instead of doing hard time and facing a parole board, having a chance to be denied, you could complete this program and be home in 6 months. I said, I'll take it. He said, there's a lot that comes with this program. You're going to have to. I repeated, I'll take it. Home in 6 months was all I heard. Elmira State Prison for me was only a stop to exchange the shackles and handcuffs and to pick up new inmates who looked more than happy to be leaving that place. They were also eligible for the Shock program. As long as you weren't convicted of a violent crime and you were sentenced to less than 3 years on the front of your sentence, you could be eligible for the Shock program. Next stop, Lakeview Correctional Facility. Lakeview was a part of the Shock program, but it was where every inmate eligible for the program had to stop first before being sent to the actual compound that they would be spending the next 6 months. At Lakeview, they basically got you prepared. They shaved your head bald if you had hair and made you stand still while they threw this powder on you that was used to get rid of any kind of crazy insects that might be hitchhiking. They gave you your pamphlet that stated all the do's and don'ts and explained what was expected of you. I knew jail or prison was not for me, and I was never coming back. It reeked of pine, funk, men, and no girls? Oh, hell no. I wanted out. We finally got up to Summit Shock correctional facility. After the introduction, I finally got it. I may not have understood right away, but I felt I had an idea of what the shock program was about. It was partially designed to test your restraint. You were pushed to your limit mentally as well as physically. Waking up at 5 in the morning every morning for physical therapy or PT. Rain, sun, or snow to see how you would respond. Everyone was tested, and many broke down. Some couldn't control their anger, fought the drill instructors or DIs or other inmates, and were sent to prison to do their full time. Depending on the severity of the incident, you could get a new charge and have additional time on top of your sentence. It wasn't easy for me. Making the transition was a process, and I went through a lot. Physically, mentally, and emotionally. But I hung in there. By this time in my life, pain was like one of my arteries. Just another part of me, but so was my talent for writing. Each dorm was broken into platoons. From A Bay all the way up to E Bay. We were E Bay, with about 30 inmates to a dorm. Our DI, Mr. Schrader, gave us a couple days to come up with a 30-second sound off that represented the war dogs, as we were called. Each platoon had one. Ours was the best. I knew that because the superintendent of the whole facility, a Puerto Rican man from the Bronx named Mr. Nieves, told us so. I wrote everything from our platoon. Our sound off, cadences that we would sing on our morning jogs, and everything we brought out to the blacktop where we did our PT. As inmates, we were all required to work. We'd pick a job and had the option of picking a duty on the compound we felt was the most suited to us. I chose to work in the administration building filing paperwork.